On today's episode, I got something special for you guys. I'm going to be doing a collaboration with 3 other channels where we're doing a knife build-along. And along with the build-along, it's also going to be a competition for experienced and novice knife makers. To qualify as a novice knife maker, you need to have less than 1 year of experience or no 2x72 grinder. Now, the other channels that will be hosting this challenge with me include Brian with B-Cone Knives, James with Redbeard Ops, and then Jeff and Kyle Royer. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is cut out our template. The template in this knife was designed by Redbeard Ops, who is obviously part of this collaboration. So we're going to go ahead and cut this template out, and then we will get it traced onto the steel, and we'll proceed from there. Now, the steel that I recommend that you use is 1084 high carbon steel. The reason that I recommend 1084 is compared to other steels, it is relatively easy to heat treat. And then the other thing that I recommend is that you use a stock that is an 1/8 inch thick or thinner. And the reason that I say that is because if we're making this knife with files, if you choose a thick piece of steel to make your knife, you are going to be filing away the steel for ages. And an 1/8 inch and even a little thinner than an 1/8 inch can make a great small knife. And since this is a little small EDC, honestly, thinner steel is going to be better. It's going to make for a more slicey knife and a better EDC. Now, there are many places where you could purchase this steel, but where I would recommend would be Maritime Knife Supply, Pops Knife Supply, Alpha Knife Supply, or New Jersey Steel Baron. Okay, so now we're going to throw this template onto the steel and get it traced out. I'm going to use a couple magnets to hold it in place. I didn't mention those earlier. Most people have some small magnets laying around. And now using the permanent marker, I'm just going to go ahead and mark it out. Okay, now I'm going to clamp this sucker in place, and we're going to use that grinding wheel to cut it out. Some other things to mention: respirator, eye protection, ear protection. When you're doing this, I use all 3. The metal dust is obviously poisonous, and you 100% need eye protection. You should always be wearing eye protection in the shop. So make sure you're using your PPE, and we'll get it going. Now, here are the awesome family-owned companies that are going to be sponsoring the prize pool. They include Maritime Knife Supply, TR Maker, Little Machine Shop, Becks Armory, and LearnKnifeMaking.com, which is actually Kyle Royer's essentially knife making school. These are all great companies that I truly believe in, and I think that you guys should go check all of these out. Stick around to the end to hear what these prize packages include. So now that I've got the knife cut out, I'm basically just using sets of assorted files to file everything to shape. Mostly a flat file, but I'll also be using some round files. And it's also good to understand that the files only cut on the push stroke, so when you're pulling the file back to you, you actually don't really need to apply weight to it. Once I have the knife fully profiled, I will throw the template back on and center punch the pinholes. I'll also punch out some areas to add some weight reduction holes that also allow the epoxy to flow through and connect the scales. Now it's time to mark out the bevel lines, and in order to do that, we need to clean up the edge of the knife. So I'll take 150 grit sandpaper and lay it on a tile and run the edge across until it's clean. Then we'll take our permanent marker and mark this edge with the permanent marker. Hopefully yours works better than mine. Alright, so now that we have the edge marked with our marker, we're going to take a drill bit. In this case, this stock is 3/32 of an inch, so it's just under an 1/8 inch. So I'll probably either use an 1/8 inch bit to mark it or something slightly smaller than 3/32. You also need to find a flat surface. I'm using a granite tile. You could use any flat tile, just check it with a straight edge and make sure that it's flat, and then you can use that as the reference to mark out your blade. The other thing is to make sure that your blade is completely straight and sits flat on that material before you go to grind it. We can always straighten it in the temper later. So I'll leave the drill bit in place and I will drag the knife across the drill bit. So here, making sure I push it super flat, drag it across, okay. Make sure I got my first line, looks good. Now I will flip it over and slide it this way, and we're gonna drag it across again, go in the other direction. Okay, so we score those 2 lines, and this is going to become the apex of our blade. I know that this looks like 1 line, but up close it actually is 2 lines. You just can't see it in the camera, but this will work. I'll leave it just a little thick because we're dealing with a little bit of an issue where you're not going to be able to use your files on the knife after heat treatment. So usually you would leave the edge of the blade a bit thicker and then do a bit more grinding afterwards. We're going to kind of have to go to our final thickness prior to heat treatment, but we'll just have to be careful when we heat treat not to overheat the edge. Okay, so this is a filing jig, and this is what we're going to use to guide us while we grind our bevels. When you get more experience, you actually probably don't even need a filing jig in a lot of scenarios, but I'm not going to show you exactly how to build this, but I'm going to explain how it works. And then I'll link in the description of a video showing you how to build it. So essentially, this is set up, this eye hole is a guide, and I'm going to take a bastard file, which a bastard file is a big file that removes a lot of material. It's got a coarse grind to it, so it's meant to remove a lot of material because that's what you want. You don't want a file that's going to remove material slowly when you're grinding your bevels out. You want something that's going to hulk off that material. This, I basically just taped it straight to a steel rod. This steel rod goes right through this eye hole. Your knife will get set up right here, and this is going to guide you to grind across the knife and maintain a certain angle. If you rise this up or move it forward, say I move it forward to here, this is going to raise the angle at which I'm grinding the blade, which would essentially allow me to grind to my center line or my apex line quicker. As I lower this or move it further back, it's going to make the grind go towards the spine of the blade. Okay, so a higher angle is going to grind towards this apex line, right? And then a lower angle, lowering this eye hole and moving it back, is going to create a lesser angle, which will allow us to grind to the spine. So we'll start with a high angle and get to our apex line, and then we will lower it and move it back and grind towards the spine. This right here is a guide, so this will get set up so that when the bar comes across, it's going to create our plunge line, and we'll hit the same spot every time, and that'll create a plunge line. And then there's going to be another screw to help hold it in place, and I'll also clamp this on over at the handle side. Okay, so now we got it set up. I've clamped the knife in place. This piece is set up where it will hit, this thing will hit it and create the plunge right where I want the plunge line to be. So I'll grind it down to the apex, and then we will slowly, like I said, raise this thing up, or actually lower it down and move it back, and that will bring us towards the spine. Okay, so here we go. I don't know if you can see, but we have made ground to the apex line on one side, and so if you see, we have a nice even bevel across the edge. So now this is going to get lowered down, and that we'll start grinding to the spine. Okay. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to point out is as you grind towards the spine, so we've already ground to the apex of the blade. As you grind to the spine, you're going to see that this grind line is going to creep towards the edge. And it's super important that as this creeps towards the edge, you don't touch that spot anymore, because then you'll be grinding into your apex line. then you'll be grinding into that apex line. So make sure that you can see the difference between the grinds. I think this shows it pretty well here, where I'm grinding the spine up here, and then this is the spot that I had already ground to the apex. So as I go to the spine, I'm going to bring it up to the edge, and once this all becomes one, I will stop grinding that, right? Because you don't want to grind into your apex. So try to learn to spot this out. This will help later also when you're hand grinding on a grinder. It's a super important thing to learn how to pull this bevel up from the spine up to the edge without cutting into your edge. Okay, so now I have the bevels ground as high as I want them. So now what I'm going to do is take a half round needle file, and I will clean up the plunge line just a little bit with that. And then I'm going to take a flat needle file, and I'm going to draw file the bevel. And the reason that I'm going to do that with a needle file is because the scratches that the bastard file leaves are very deep scratches that cannot easily be sanded out. So if I take this flat needle file, and I draw file all of the bastard file scratches out, the scratches that the needle file will leave are much easier to sand out. They're nowhere near as deep of scratches as the bastard file is going to leave. So once I'm done draw filing this with the needle file, it will be significantly easier to hand sand it to a finished, grit. So now that I'm done with this side, I'm going to go ahead and take the clamps off, move the plunge screw to the other side, flip the knife over, and repeat the exact same process. Okay, so we're just going to copy that same process on the other side, and then we'll move on to the next step. So now that we're done with the filing jig and the files, I'm going to go ahead and sand the flats to 150, and I'm going to accomplish this just by taking a piece of sandpaper, putting it on a flat tile, and then just running the knife across it. Once all the scratches are all running in the same direction on the flats, then we will be done, and I will go ahead and sand the bevels, and at that point it will be ready for heat treatment. Okay, so we ground in our bevels with the file, and then we used a needle file to draw file these bevels out, which is what we did there was we worked out all the deep scratches from the bastard file. So now I'm going to start with 100 grit, and I'm going to try to sand these bevels up to 100 and then 150, and then we'll probably heat treat from there.
So I'll be using Windex essentially like as a lubricant for the sandpaper. The reason I use that as opposed to water is because the water will start rusting your blade and the Windex won't. And then I'm going to use a piece of flat steel to back the sandpaper. And the goal here is to sand just the bevel and not touch the flats, because you want to leave a crispy line between the flats and the bevel, and that's going to give a professional look. If you sand out the line between the flat and the bevel, it just looks less professional or like you have less experience. Now, I wasn't able to accomplish this as good as I would like to, or as good as I could if I was using power tools in my 2x72 grinder, but I did the best job I could under the circumstances with the tools that I'm using. Another thing to keep in mind is that the steel dulls the sandpaper very quickly. So try to get a feel for when you initially start sanding and the feel for the way the grit feels across the steel, and then the feel that it gets after you've used it a bit and it's dulled the sandpaper out. So you really only want to use the sandpaper for a few seconds at a time before you fold up and use the next portion of the sandpaper, because sanding with dull sandpaper is just a waste of your time. So now this brings us to the conclusion of the first video. Next video, we'll start off by covering how to heat treat the knife, and then we will finish the knife up, glue the scales on, and all that good stuff. And then as far as the competition details, I will go over them briefly now, but all of the information will be in the description below. We will be releasing the part 2 of the build videos on November 18th. And then all of your build photos for the overall and the novice builders will be due by November 27th, 2022. And then we will announce the winners for best overall knife and best novice winner on November 30th. And then to enter the competition, basically you'll need to subscribe to my channel as well as the other 3 hosting channels, and then head over to Instagram and follow us all on there as well. And then you'll need to submit the photo of your build-along knife by November 27th. If you're a novice, make sure that you put novice in the subject line. And again, that means that you've been making knives for less than a year or don't have a 2x72 grinder. And then as far as the prize pool goes, both the overall and novice winner will be receiving a Kyle Royer beginner bladesmithing course, which is, priceless essentially, especially if you're starting out. And then from Maritime, you'll both be receiving $200 Canadian money to that website, which I believe is about 150 USD. Both contestants will also be receiving a package from Little Machine Shop that includes things like a caliper, a height scribe, squares, a straight edge, as well as some other things. It's a really nice little package. And then for the best overall knife winner only, they will also be receiving a disc grinding chassis from Becks Armory and the 9-inch disc that goes with it from TR Maker. Now this actually is not the full build because you do need to do some fabrication as well as purchase a motor, but it is the base for a awesome tool that can definitely level up your knife making, and I'd be super stoked to have one myself. Now if you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to the channel. And if you want to be notified when I upload new videos, please hit that notification bell. And as always, thanks for watching.